Chicago, 1897. Evening. Dusk had settled over the bustling city, casting long, skeletal shadows from the gaslights. A damp chill clung to the air, seeping through my threadbare coat as I stood before the imposing iron gates of the Cook County Central Jail. My name is Evelyn Thorne, and tonight I was about to enter a place most people prayed they'd never see. My stomach churned, a cocktail of fear and morbid curiosity. My brother, Thomas, a talented artist with a penchant for finding trouble, had been incarcerated here a week ago on charges of inciting a riot. The details remained murky, a tangled mess of accusations and whispers. All I knew was that Thomas wouldn't have done anything malicious. His art might have been provocative, but violence was out of character for him. Determined to visit him, I'd spent the past week navigating the city's labyrinthine bureaucracy, facing suspicion and disdain from officials who considered me naive, a woman venturing into the lion's den. Finally, after jumping through countless hoops, I secured a permit for a single, brief visit. The air inside the jail was thick with the stench of staly sweat, disinfectant, and something else. A metallic tang that evoked a sickening image of blood. The clanging of metal echoed through the high-ceilinged corridors, punctuated by the occasional guttural scream. Guards, their faces etched with grim indifference, patrolled the halls, their heavy boots echoing on the stone floors. The warden, a burly man with a face creased like crumpled parchment, eyed me with undisguised disapproval. 1 hour only, Miss Thorne, and mind you, no funny business. His voice, devoid of warmth, sent shivers down my spine. Following a guard down a dimly lit corridor, I passed cell after cell. Gaunt, hollow-eyed faces peered out through the bars, their expressions a mix of resignation and desperation. A sense of oppressive despair hung heavy in the air. The guard, a young man with nervous eyes, stopped before a rusty iron door. "Your brother's in here," he muttered, unlocking the door with a metallic clang. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself. What if I found Thomas broken? What if these walls had already swallowed him whole? Pushing open the door, I stepped into the cramped, fetid cell. A single flickering gaslight cast a sickly yellow glow on the squalid interior. A mound of dirty straw lay in one corner, serving as a makeshift bed. In the opposite corner, hunched over a bucket, was a figure. "Thomas." My voice barely sounded like my own. The figure turned slowly, revealing a gaunt face with shadowed eyes. It took me a moment to recognize my brother. His usually vibrant auburn hair was matted, his once bright eyes dulled and filled with a haunted emptiness. He had a deep gash above his eyebrow, crusted with dried blood. "Evelyn." His voice was a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here?" Relief washed over me, momentarily eclipsing the fear. He was alive, even if barely. We exchanged hurried explanations, my voice a rapid torrent of words, filling him in on the outside world. He listened intently, a flicker of life returning to his eyes. But as I spoke, a sense of unease settled in my gut. "Did they hurt you, Thomas?" I asked, pointing at the gash. He flinched, his gaze darting nervously around the cell. "Not the guards," he muttered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's the others, Evelyn. Something's wrong with them." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I pressed, urgency lacing my voice. His eyes darted to the corner of the cell. "They talk. At night. Not to each other. They speak. To something else." A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "Something in the darkness. They say it answers." A shiver racked my body. The stories whispered in the slums, dismissed as mere folklore, suddenly seemed chillingly real. Was this what Thomas meant by the riot? A response to some unseen entity? "What does it say?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Thomas shook his head, his face contorted in fear. "They don't understand. It's not like words. Images. Horrible images." He squeezed his eyes shut, as if trying to banish the memory. The guard bellowed from the hallway, signaling the end of my visit. I embraced Thomas tightly, a silent vow to get him out of this place. But as I stepped back, my foot snagged on something lying in the straw. It was a small, crudely carved object, resembling a twisted pentagram fashioned from a shard of bone. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't some childish prank. This was deliberate, a symbol of dark intent. "What is it?" I asked Thomas, holding the object out with trembling fingers. He recoiled in horror. "Get rid of it, throw it away." His voice was a desperate plea. Confused and scared, I pocketed the object, tucking it away beneath my cloak. The guard's impatient bellow filled the corridor. With one last tearful goodbye, I hurried out, the carved symbol burning a hole in my pocket. Back in the warden's office, I surrendered my visitor's pass, my mind racing with Thomas's chilling words. What was this entity they spoke of, and what role had it played in the riot? The warden, sensing my distress, barked, "Out you go, miss. No more time for chit-chat." I left the jail feeling powerless, the heavy iron gates clanging shut behind me like the final nail in a coffin. My initial urge was to seek help from the authorities. But could I trust them? What if they dismissed it as the ramblings of a delusional artist? Determined to save Thomas, I decided to take matters into my own hands. My first stop was the city morgue, a grim but necessary visit. The stench of decay assaulted me as I entered the cold, dimly lit room. I inquired about any unusual deaths from the jail, deaths that might explain the entity's presence. The overworked undertaker, a man with a face as pale as the bodies he handled, shook his head. "Nothing out of the ordinary, miss. Just the usual fare, shankings, suicides, the occasional illness." Disappointment gnawed at me. Next, I sought out the city's underbelly, the hidden corners where whispers of the occult and the macabre swirled. My search led me to a dingy tavern frequented by fortune-tellers, peddlers of potions, and those who dabbled in the forbidden. After a tense exchange and a fee paid in silver coins, I secured a meeting with a wizened old woman known as Madame Zoya, rumored to possess otherworldly knowledge. She resided in a dilapidated apartment cluttered with dusty tomes and strange artifacts. Madame Zoya, her eyes like pools of molten gold, listened intently as I recounted Thomas's words and showed her the carved pentagram. A low growl rumbled from her throat. "The whispers of the shadows," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "They speak of an ancient evil, trapped within these very walls. A hunger that grows with every passing day." A spark of fear ignited within me. "Can you help me?" I pleaded. "Can you save Thomas?" Her gaze held mine, a flicker of something like pity in her eyes. "There may be a way," she said, her voice barely audible. "But it comes at a fearful cost." She then proceeded to lay out a plan, a ritual involving the summoning and banishing of the entity. It was a dangerous proposition, one that could backfire spectacularly. But with Thomas's life hanging in the balance, I had no choice. Over the next few days, I gathered the necessary ingredients for the ritual: herbs with unknown properties, a vial filled with an iridescent liquid that sent shivers down my spine, and an ornately carved silver dagger. Fear gnawed at me, but resolve held me firm. The night of the ritual arrived, a night when the moon hid behind a veil of thick clouds, plunging the city into an inky darkness. Disguised as a street sweeper, I gained access to the alley behind the jail. Following Madame Zoya's instructions, I drew a sigil on the cobblestone ground with chalk blessed by moonlight. The air crackled with an unseen energy as I chanted the words she had provided. A cold wind whipped through the alley, swirling the dust into a miniature tornado. The silence was shattered by a deafening roar that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. A swirling mass of inky darkness materialized above the prison walls, pulsing with an unholy light. It was unlike anything I had ever witnessed, a creature of pure malevolence. Panic threatened to consume me, but the image of my brother fueled my resolve. With trembling hands, I plunged the silver dagger into the heart of the sigil, completing the ritual. A shriek of pure rage tore through the night as the entity writhed in agony. The air shimmered, reality seeming to warp around it before it dissipated into nothingness. Silence descended, heavy and oppressive. Exhausted and trembling, I sank to the ground, the silver dagger clattering beside me. Had it worked? Had I saved Thomas and banished the entity forever? Uncertain, I crept towards the prison wall. To my relief, a faint light flickered from a window high above. It was Thomas's cell. With newfound determination, I scaled the rough-hewn brick wall, my fingers scraping against the cold stone. Reaching the window, I peered inside. Thomas sat on his straw bed, his head in his hands. He looked up with a start, his face a mask of shock. "Evelyn?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "What are you doing?" I tumbled through the window, landing in a heap at his feet. Tears streamed down my face as I wrapped my arms around him. He held me tightly, his body racked with sobs. It was then I noticed a change in him. A flicker of the haunted look was gone, replaced by a spark of life in his eyes. The entity's influence, it seemed, had been broken. We spent the next hour whispering in the darkness, recounting our experiences. When the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange, I knew I had to get him out of there. "I'll find a way," I whispered, holding his gaze. "We'll get you out of here." "I'll find a way," I whispered, holding his gaze. "We'll get you out of here." Leaving the jail that morning, I felt a surge of hope, battling the remnants of fear. The entity might be gone, but the ordeal had changed us both. The darkness we faced within those walls had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. One question, however, lingered in the back of my mind. Had I truly banished the entity, or had I simply driven it back into the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to rise? As I walked away from the towering prison walls, a cold breeze whispered through the alley, sending shivers down my spine. The city might seem a little brighter, but the shadows still held secrets that might one day resurface.